Method overloading. In this video, we will define and demonstrate how to overload methods. In an earlier video, we defined a method in the rectangle class called grow that received two integer parameters, then increased the length instance variable by the value of the first parameter and the width instance variable by the value of the second parameter. Now suppose I define a second method named grow that receives just one integer parameter, that increases both the length and the width instance variables by that same amount. This code might raise a couple questions. Okay? The first question might be, would the compiler allow this? Would the compiler allow a class to have two different methods with the same exact name? And the answer to that is yes. And that answer might lead to a follow-up question. How is the compiler going to know which grow method I'm trying to use when I attempt to use one of them inside the main method? To answer that question, consider the following program. Suppose in my main method, I declare a rectangle with a length of 2 and a width of 6. Then in the next line, I call the grow method and I pass it the integer 5. Based on how this code is written, can you guess which grow method will be invoked, the first one or the second one? You're probably guessing the second one based off the number of parameters I passed to the grow method. Since I only gave it one integer parameter, it only makes sense to invoke the version of grow method where the header contains just one int parameter. Okay. Likewise, had I given it two parameters, it only makes sense to invoke the version of the grow method where the header contained two integer parameters. All of this is an example of method overloading. Method overloading is defining two or more methods with the exact same header, except the methods will have a different number of parameters, or different parameter types, or different order of the parameter types. Here's what I mean by each. So we've already seen an example of having two methods with the same name, but a different number of parameters. And also, sidebar, notice how instead of putting the body of the method, I'm just putting 3 dots. That's because our focus right now is just on the header of the methods, not the body. So, as I've just stated, we've already seen an example of having two methods with the same name, but a different number of parameters. Another example of method overloading would be if I changed the type of the parameter. For example, if I wanted, I could define a third grow method that receives two doubles as parameters. I could also define a fourth grow method that receives just one double as a parameter. Now, when I go to my main method, how is the compiler going to know which one I'm trying to use? First, it's going to look at two things. First off, it's going to look at the number of parameters that I give it. Am I giving it one parameter or two parameters? Then it's going to look at the type of parameter I'm typing in. Did I give it an integer or did I give it a double? Did I give it a whole number like 3 or 10 or 20? Or did I give it a double like 3.5 or 10.6 or 20.75? These are just a few of the ways the compiler will be able to differentiate. Likewise, if I wanted to, I could define a fifth grow method that receives two parameters, but this time an int followed by a double. Once again, how will the compiler know which one I'm trying to use? Well, if I were to give it two integers, it would know that I'm trying to invoke the first grow method. If I were to give it two doubles, then it would know that I'm trying to invoke the third grow method. And if I gave it an integer followed by a double, then it would know I'm trying to invoke the fifth grow method. Another way we could overload the grow method is by changing the order of the parameter types. For example, if I wanted, I could define a sixth grow method that receives a double followed by an integer. Now notice the difference between the fifth and sixth grow methods. The fifth grow method receives an integer followed by a double. The sixth one receives a double followed by an integer. So the way the compiler will be able to differentiate between the two in the main method is by the order of the parameters that I give it. If I give it an integer first, then a double, it'll know I'm trying to invoke the fifth grow method. If I pass it a double first, followed by an integer, it'll know that I'm trying to invoke the sixth grow method. Now, what is not an example of method overloading is simply changing the names of the parameters. If I were to define a seventh grow method that also receives a double followed by an integer, but all I did was change the names of the parameters, that would not count. The compiler would flag me, because when I go to the main method, and I attempt to invoke the grow method by passing it a double followed by an integer, how is the compiler going to be able to differentiate between the 6th and 7th grow methods? Simply changing the parameter names doesn't allow the compiler to be able to differentiate. Hence why, to overload a method, you either have to use a different number of parameters, use different parameter types, or change the order of the parameter types. Simply changing the names in the context of method overloading is meaningless.